hand, the things that get researched, and on the other hand, the things that patients and their clinicians and their carers want to have researched. So that is, the people whose lives are intended to benefit from the research. There is, you might say, a mismatch between supply and demand. And this arises not because the researchers are evil or stupid or whatever. It arises because they just can't intuit the issues that patients and their carers and their doctors necessarily want them to look at. So there are some examples of this mismatch. In asthma, for example, if you have severe asthma, there are breathing exercises that you have to do every day, as I understand it, and they are a pain in the ass. And lots of patients want to know whether it's really worth doing them, whether they actually help with anything. Most of the medical research into asthma, you can imagine, is bench research. It's kind of wet research, as people in nature actually call it. So it looks at the biomechanisms, and it's quite different from breathing exercises. An analogy around, an example from sight loss is that loads of the research in sight loss is at the end of the process when someone's sight is almost completely gone, looking at trying to retain some of it, whereas a lot of patients, the real panic is at the beginning when your sight starts to go. So there has arisen a structured process within medical research for consulting with patients and their carers and their clinicians to elicit from them the topics on which they would like to have more research. And this process has run for about 10 years, and it runs on a condition-by-condition basis, and it's run in, I think, about 60 conditions. So there's one run in asthma, one on breast cancer, one on oral care, one on depression, one on sight loss, one on Alzheimer's, for example. And those are often done, organised and funded by the patient groups themselves, who obviously are charities. The convening entity is called the James Lind Alliance, named after James Lind, who was a Scottish, I think, surgeon. He's the guy that ran the trial in the 17th century on ships, which figured out that giving sailors citrus fruit would stop them all from getting scurvy. And so it's named after him because it's a way of improving the kind of research that we do. And so when I was in discussion with Stephen and others about the centre that he talked about, here's a picture of Oxford, in case you don't know what Oxford looks like, about the new institute at Oxford as a mechanism for increasing the amount of research into charities and philanthropy, I thought, you know what, I bet that if we're not careful, that institute and much of the rest of the research in this sector could have the same problem. That there could again be a mismatch between supply and demand, between what charities and donors want to know and what they think they need to know, and on the other hand, what gets researched. And so I said, wouldn't it be a good idea if we did a couple of things? One is to understand actually what research already exists in this terrain. And then on the other hand is to ask charities and donors and funders of various descriptions, what do you want to know? And then we will put the two together. And so we are doing both of those. We are using the James Lind Alliance's process. It seems to be the first time that process has been used outside of medical research. And the JLA has no formal involvement, but they are hugely supportive. The James Lind Alliance was set up by Sir Ian Chalmers, who some of you might know or know of, who set up the Cochrane collaboration. Almost everything in evidence-based medicine has got Ian's fingerprints on it somewhere. The joke in evidence-based medicine is that if you have a good idea, that Ian had it 10 years ago. And so we are doing two studies. What you can't see the same one, it's the same graph as before. One is to map supply, what exists already, and the other is to track demand, to look at what would be useful to have. It's deliberately a very open and consultative process, and I'm going to describe it a bit, and I'm also going to invite you to get involved with it. We are partway through at this point. The part of the reason that I made it my business to get to know the James Lind Alliance when I first discovered it, like all good things on Twitter, was because my work is with charities and funders of various types, trying to get charitable giving to be based on better evidence, and charitable activity to be based on better evidence. And very often we have this issue that you cannot base your work on decent research because there isn't enough decent research into the area, right? And so really often we need there to be more research, but the amount of more research that we need exceeds the research capacity, the production capacity. So there has to be some prioritization effort. And it seems to me really sensible to have a structured and deliberative process for determining research priorities. This is, in a way, one of those things that sounds really obvious, but somebody has to invent it. The world was not created with a mechanism for sensibly prioritizing research topics. And so this is what we are doing. So the process, as I say, was born within medical research. We are using it here. My organisation, Giving Evidence, has run a variant of it around intensive farm animal production. But you can imagine that this kind of approach could be useful in all sorts of things. In homelessness or domestic violence or child abuse, for example. It could be really useful to engage the demand side right at the beginning in determining what the research questions are and ensuring that we are asking and that the research is answering the questions that practitioners really have. We don't say that demand is the sole determinant of a research agenda. So my own background is in physics. I 100% am alive to the value of research that nobody asked for. Nobody asked Michael Faraday to invent electricity. Nobody asked Einstein to invent or develop general relativity. I got lost on the way here. I had to use my GPS on my phone. GPS on my phone rely on a correction for general relativity. I would love it if someone asked a question about that later. But it seems to me that the demand side is not the sole determinant, but is a necessary determinant of a necessary input into a research agenda. And so that's what we're doing. So the work here is designed to influence the work of the proposed centre in Oxford, but also to other researchers within the sector. So it is, I'm really sorry about this weird purple splodge at the back of these slides, I didn't know about that. So in our process, we are asking UK registered charities, non-profits, community interest companies, non-profits of all types, faith-based groups, for example, and funders and donors, so private individuals, foundations, corporate foundations, government funders, but not. We are asking them about this simple question about what research / evidence / data / insight would help you in your work. What more in that arena would you like? And the plan is that we come up with a prioritized list. That is a gift that we will give to the research community, so to researchers who work with the Oxford Centre, but also to the others. There are centres, as you know, working on this in St Andrews, in Sheffield, in Canterbury, in Oxford, in LSE, in Plymouth and elsewhere. And they would all be welcome. They will be invited to be involved in this process, and they will all be welcome to use the results. And this whole thing is, of course, a behaviour change exercise. I often think, actually, that all of research is a behaviour change exercise, albeit in a disguise, and often a pretty good disguise, actually. But the aim here is to influence the behaviour of researchers in order to generate more research that donors and charities can use to improve their work. So we're not just doing this as a meta-research piece that we're doing, it's a research about research, and we're not just doing it because we happen to be into meta-research, we're doing this as a mechanism of improving beneficiaries' lives, right? So in the way that I described about, the asthma, people might want to, let's see whether this asthma exercises actually do help. And in the same way, we can find out the answers to questions that charities think would really help them. So charities are asked, or these charities and donors are invited to submit questions about management, or governance, or finance, or IT, or communications, or effectiveness, or impact, or pretty much anything. The sole thing that we have taken off the table is fundraising. And there are two reasons for that. One is that fundraising is so dominant in people's minds that we were concerned that it would eclipse everything else. And the other is because the purpose of this project is to highlight questions that are under-researched because researchers don't realise that they are there. And it is not the case that researchers have not noticed that fundraising is there. Okay? It's such an obvious thing that we felt we just didn't need to give people the opportunity to talk about it. So the project is led by a team, of which we can only read half. So there's an advisory group, that's the more important part, which is deliberately drawn from across the sector, operating organisations and funders and various others, and various academics. We invited a lot of academics to be involved because we don't want this project to seem like a bunch of random people turning up and telling academics what to do. So it's been enormously valuable to have them involved. The process itself, can you read this? Sort of. The process itself is, as I say, it's deliberately a very open and consultative process. It's a variant of the James Lind Alliance process. Don't worry about every word on here. We ran some focus groups, 5, in various places in the country, as reconnaissance, basically. Like, what happens if you ask charities and donors this question about on what topics would you like more research? We were pretty confident that if you go to people who have, let's say, breast cancer, and you ask them, what in breast cancer do you think needs more research, that they would understand what you were talking about, and they would understand why you were asking. But we were not confident that if we asked charities and donors the analogous question, that they would understand what we were talking about, and indeed that is to some extent what we found. Which was useful, that's why we did them. So we had to organise the survey, which comes next, accordingly. Then we did a survey which went out over the summer, big and wide and open, and invited anybody to submit, anybody of those categories, so non-profit or funder in the UK, to submit questions that they would think would benefit from more research. And then we have gone through those questions in the last month or so and stripped out the duplication and kicked out the questions that are out of scope, and we have combined some. As you would imagine, there were several clumps of questions, and so now we have a list of about 50 questions, and we are running a second survey in which we are inviting you to participate, which has those 50 questions, and it asks, of these, which do you think should be the highest priority? After that, that will be open for about 6 weeks or so, and after that there will be a prioritisation workshop, and so we will emerge with a short list of probably around a dozen priority questions, and as I say, that is a gift that will go to researchers in this sector who will be welcome to use this process. The James Lind Alliance in medical research has managed to get itself cooked into the National Health Service funding system, because Ian Chalmers is very clever, and we haven't, there isn't such an organised funding process mechanism or body here within this sector, but very much we hope that it will, as I say, influence research and influence outcomes thereby. So the specific questions, as you know, in good research you should always report the precise question that you ask, because that determines the answers that you get, and the questions that you got, oh my god, you can't read this at all. And I can't read it either. Okay, so this was supposed to be white on black. So the precise questions that we asked were, how often do you use the following types of research? And we listed them: academic research, research by government, impact reports, and so on. Secondly, if you hardly ever or never use academic research, why is that? Thirdly, what questions about charities and or giving would you like additional research to answer? And then fourthly, what additional data or evidence or information would help you in your work, and why? So there were only those 4 questions in the survey, so relatively brief. And here is what happened. Okay, this is really frustrating. So we had 51 responses. We had 449 suggestions were made. Some of them were out of scope because either they were too or they were, are the lights changing? Okay, guys, don't worry, it's the slide background, don't worry. It's much easier. Is it? Alright, whatever, okay. Some of them were too, some questions were too specific, that they related solely to specific causes. Some were asking, this is really interesting, some were asking for information that's already available. So for instance, somebody asked for, I would really like to see an evaluation of X. There is already an evaluation of X. So we just sent it to them actually. But that's kind of interesting. That's kind of interesting because it speaks to this whole question about the extent to which research is findable. Okay. So within our sector, within charities and philanthropy, the research infrastructure is dreadful. So in medical research, for example, you can go to a thing called PubMed, which is a database of basically all medical research, and it is indexed. And people bitch about it, but at least there is something. Whereas in our sector, what happens is that basically people publish their research on their own websites, and there's no, so if you don't know that website is there, then you wouldn't know to go and ask for it. And there's no organized tag. You can get around that if you have an organized tagging system, but we don't. So actually, we've done some work on trying to sort that out. Anyway, so we got onto this final list of 50 questions, in which there was quite a lot of chatter about impact, measuring impact. So people wanting different ways of measuring impact, different ways of they're wanting ways that capture their impact across the heterogeneous types of activity that they do. A lot about how can we better communicate our impact with donors. Now, some of these are research questions. Some of these are questions, well, they're not research questions, but it is interesting to ask why this question is being asked. And there may be some research that one can do usefully around that. So there was quite a lot about the interplay between funded organisations and funders. And actually, having been in this sector now for really quite a long time, a lot of the things that come up are the same things. You mentioned core cost, the same things that have been around for ages and which still rattle through people's minds. So there's some I'm interested in the questions about why are these problems still here? Why have we not solved these things yet? And then there was quite a lot of asking for research methods that actually already exist. So how do we identify the impact of an intervention in people's lives when there are loads of other things going on in people's lives? Okay, this was given as a research question. Please, can the academics develop such a thing? Actually, we have such a thing. Right? A large-scale randomized control trial will do that. Okay? And these things have existed since the 1960s, 70s. So there's something interesting here. There are a set of research questions that have emerged, but there's also a set of things which one might do or one might build, which would help the sector, but which are not calls for academic research as such. So improving the research infrastructure, making material more findable, that's not a research question, but it does it's a thing that one needs to build. Or making people more aware of the research methods that already exist and how and when they can use them is a capacity building thing, for example, on which we can work. A thing that emerged really strongly from the focus groups and to some extent from the survey is a notion that people feel that academic research is quite irrelevant from them in general. So, clearly I had a hunch of this, having been in the sector for a while, that actually the number of times I have heard charities or funders refer to pieces of academic research having influenced their work in 15 years is really small. And so I got the sense that people think about academic research as something that happens kind of over there. The other people do it and it's fine and it's harmless and whatever. There's not got much to do with me. Okay. And that seems to me something that we usefully could change. This is largely, as you know, a publicly funded process. So that is what we have found thus far. We are, as I say, we are doing studies on both, on supply and demand. The supply study is just getting going, so looking to catalogue the existing research that's being done in partnership with University College London, deliberately being done by a research house outside of the voluntary sector, so not people who are active in the sector themselves, because we don't want people overweighting their own research or their own kind of pet things. So very rigorous prospective researchers, but a little bit external. We are doing both of these pieces of research properly, so we are publishing our protocol for how we are doing them, for example, and you can find that the protocol for the demand study is published already, and that for the supply study will come out quite soon. So we invite you to get involved. The survey, the second survey, which is the prioritization survey, is open now. It is online. We think it takes about 10 minutes to do. We have a bunch of hard copies here that we will have at lunch. So if you would take 10 minutes of your lunch break to rattle through, read through these 50 questions and tell us which of them you think is the highest priority ones, that would be enormously helpful. And then we will publish the results of both of these in the spring, and we will let you know what they are. And as I say, the hope is A, that this will inform the work of researchers in the Institute and within the sector more broadly, but also that it would advertise this approach of engaging the demand side in setting a research agenda within the voluntary sector more broadly, because many of the sectors in which we work could benefit from this kind of approach. Thank you.